Welcome back to another episode of Rethink Real Estate. Today I get to interview Greg Fowler. Greg is the host of the wildly successful podcast Real Estate Titans, where he interviews industry experts in every class of real estate. It's actually one of the things that we speak about. He live streams it on a Tuesday, and it scares the Christ out of me actually interviewing people live on the individual portals that he does. But it's very, very entertaining, and he's got a great host style where he goes through into great intimate depth with people. But today we talk about his story, where he started in the title industry and he revolutioned his business to be a digital marketing company. He founded Lion Bolt Media, and we go through online strategy in a great deal of depth, but also we go into his story and what he's learned from the volume of top professionals in the real estate industry and him interviewing over 270 of them. Hope you enjoy. Great episode. Definitely got a lot out of it. Welcome to Rethink Real Estate. My name is Ben Brady, and this is a real estate podcast aimed to deliver sales strategies, marketing tips, and business insights from industry experts and myself to build a listing-focused business for the future. Let's get into it. Greg, welcome to Rethink Real Estate.
Hey, Ben, it's an honor and a pleasure, my friend. This is going to be electric. Can't wait.
So I've got a first little bit of a question I want to ask. For those that are listening, they've heard my introduction. Real Estate Titans is an incredible podcast from an industry perspective that I really enjoy. So congratulations on that, first of all. But I want best Real Estate Titans interview story. Like, I don't know whether it's quirky. I want something. Give me something.
Yeah. So the first thing that comes to mind, and it was, it was an episode out of LA. It was James Harris. And James Harris, what an incredible individual. And just the way that he delivers his message is so genuine in nature. Like, you're really knowing one another for a lifetime. So love that, man. Hey, James, if you're watching this, big shout out. But what was so special about his episode, even though everything was so poignant and directive to value driven and, revenue, generation activities into real estate to the highest of levels on luxury, his mother walked in halfway through the episode. So we're sitting in his house, and literally his mother walks in, jumps right in front of the camera, and I was blown away. Sweetest woman ever. And I start interviewing her. I said, hey, James, let's go. I start interviewing his mom. It was one of my absolute favorite episodes. But what was great about that, in a distractive nature, because Titans is always live. So we've seen and heard so many different things, craziness and nature and movement. And any accident that could happen has happened. Any cutoff that's happened has happened. But what was great about that is getting a perspective, James being there and his mom really articulating the start, and him as a child. Because most of us aren't going to articulate our childhood nature. We might say, hey, we grew up here, we're youngest of this, and, da-da-da. But from her eyes as to he's evolved as an individual, to me, was one of the best examples of someone's origin story that I've heard. So I love that one. But we've heard so much. I mean, when it comes down to it, Ben, full-blown stories of some of the hardest hardships that you can fathom. So, drug abuse, alcoholism, and addiction. We've had a Titan that actually murdered somebody, and it was vehicular homicide, loss of family and pain and struggle. So some of the hardest hardships that you can imagine, and some of the highest of highs. So that's what's so beautiful about the human condition. And even though it's, titled as Real Estate Titans, it's about people first. It's about their story, their journey, and what they've learned along the way that they're willing to share and bestow upon the people who are taking their time. So, I don't know if that was the answer to the question that you were looking for, but there's so much to it. I just absolutely love it.
No, it's great. But today we want to get to know a little bit about you. We were just talking before, is the factor that I get to be the host today. Okay. I get to ask the questions. You say you're more comfortable on the host side of things. So at the end of the day, bring it on. Lean into the discomfort here with me. Lean into the discomfort. But I guess that the part of this that I just want to understand your journey to here, because if you were to take into consideration where you are now, and thought leader is something that I believe that you are in the real estate industry at this point, that we're very grateful to have you on our podcast. But I think that the industry should be grateful to have somebody like you that's willing to take the time to to dig deeper into the people that are the absolute best in the industry. What's led you to be so curious about the industry?
Gosh, man. I mean, as an individual in and of itself, I've always been naturally curious. I think as a kid growing up, I wasn't a troublemaker in the sense of the word. I got in trouble because I was talking too much, because I was distracting others, being inquisitive as to what they were doing and what they were thinking, and really having conversations. And that's always been a part of my life. And that's extended onto career and path, and obviously into the podcast. So for me in particular, it's just this burning desire to know more and to be able to apply that aspect to my own life, but to surround my family and the clients that I serve. And then in addition to outward approach, one to many is really the ultimate goal to that. And leaving this place better than when we got here, I think, is the ultimate, tier. So for us to not be able to be inquisitive, to take the time to understand where someone came from and what hardships and pain, but also successes and the highest levels they've reached, to really apply that to our own, but then share it out there. I'm a firm believer that light does attract light, and the right people come into your life based off of what you put out there. And I think that can apply to personal relationships and anything that you have in that aspect, but also into the business world. Do unto others sort of mentality. So for me, I love learning. It never gets old. I mean, Ben, and what you're doing here, with Rethink Real Estate is absolutely phenomenal and amazing. And you and I have, several acquaintances that we know in mutual sort of circles. And gosh, I just love the aspect of how you're really taking that conversation and articulating out to the audience, providing value. And I know that value is that kind of coined phrase. Everybody wants to provide value, but what does that mean to the people you're really bringing it to? That is the ultimate question. We can't pretend to know it all. I think that's nonsense. We should always be learning. We should always be growing and having those inquisitive notes and conversations. To me, you never know who's going to teach you something. And, being a newer father, my daughter's going to be 5 next month. And I have a son who's 1. For me, it's, you can learn from a child all the way up to somebody obviously who's been through 100 years plus of life. And I think it's just taking the time to ask the right questions, but not just to do that, but to listen and really absorb and then break that apart. That to me, it's just a fine art and a tool that I've always loved. I can't find the root cause of that, just being who I am. It's a part of what I've always done. So there wasn't an aha moment. I wasn't watching Larry King and saying, hey, someday I'd like to be, that's not it. So I don't know if that answered the question, but that's kind of what came to mind, Ben, when you asked.
So where does all this start from? How does your affection for real estate start? How does this whole career start?
Yeah, sure. So I guess taking it back, early days, I was that little kid with a backwards Seattle Mariners cap, knocking on doors, selling candy bars. I grew up in Washington State, youngest of 4 boys. It was really great growing up there. Never noticed any of the weather, even though, I'm in New England now and I'm looking out the window and it's a typical New England day. Here, but the rain never bothered. We were always climbing trees, jumping in stumps. Being the youngest of 4 boys, there was always somebody to put me in my place. So, big shout out to my brothers, doing that made me the man who I am today. But going into the aspect, I've always been in sales. So for me, it's always just been a nature of conversation and really understanding, to the inquisitive nature, what makes people make the decisions that they do and why, and how do they come to those conclusions? Can I guide them through that process? So, at an early age, I just knew that it had to be something to do with that. So I've done so many different things, under the sun that way. But it was all revolving around relationships, conversations, and really helping provide that end user the result, what they're looking for. So from car sales to insurance to looking at it from that standpoint, I've always had a nerdy bug, I guess, is what some people would say. So I've been known to kind of make that shift in the industry as far as marketing and digital marketing is concerned. Self-taught, not classically trained. I don't have massive degrees. It ends up being practitioner nature, right? Putting the paces, really articulating what works and what doesn't. But no disrespect to higher education. I think that's a wonderful aspect when it comes down to that. If there is a time and a place for that, I 100% agree. But for me, I've always just been a part of the school of hard knocks. Nothing was ever given. It was always raised from a young age. Hey, if you want something, go get it. No one's going to hand you anything. the love and support that you have as parents. And I always thank them. The example that my mom and my dad had given me, without them, I obviously wouldn't be who I am today. I can take that into stride to, partnerships that I have and forge. And my number one partner in my life is my wife. So same principle that applies. Wouldn't be who I am today without her, kind of guiding and bouncing and really having accountability into that nature. So getting into real estate, going down the sales vertical, it was very fascinating to me. It was in the title industry. So people don't really understand how that progression works. And for me, going from sales position to always be naturally curious and, looking at search engine optimization and different levels of coding, and obviously way before social media aspects are coming into play. This was like pre-MySpace sort of scenarios, bringing everybody back, so this is, it's interesting to kind of correlate that note. But for me, I was always looking at it from a standpoint of, how can we better our relationships and help grow and scale business? So through a mutual acquaintance that I actually had come into, this was an opportunity for title. We were talking about this prior to what I call the green room. And so Greg Wolf actually was the individual who saw something in me and hired me into the title business. Happens to be brothers with Bob, which you know very well. And the interesting note and factor to that is when I had the conversation with Greg, initially he said, hey, so this is the position, sales and title insurance, and this is what's going on. And I knew nothing about real estate. I knew nothing about title insurance and anything that's going on that way. I'm just this young guy who's super hungry and always positive in nature, helping people grow with a nerd background. So having the conversations, it just made no sense. I said, so the job is to take people golfing and go to lunches and dinners and have drinks, and then they just send you business, and then I get paid, and I've got a salary and benefits and all that. It was the weirdest thing.
And this is in the day where you didn't have a budget, I'm assuming, either from a title company perspective. I remember meeting a title rep that said to me prior to the crash or the 0809 thing where they regulated it. He's like, I would get in trouble for not spending enough money.
There is, depending on who you work with and or work for, there's regulations and notes. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely ranges depending on the markets and the regions. But I do remember those aspects. It made no sense. And so I remember saying to Greg, I said, hey, do you mind if I try it this way? And he said, explain to me. And I said, hey, I'm kind of nerdy and techie. So my idea is the loose understanding of a real estate transaction is, from a title standpoint, the goal is, from a sales perspective, to generate more business to be closed, more transactions coming in the door so that we can all grow and win. So wouldn't it be in my best interest to help those realtors and those lenders grow their books of business? The more transactions that they're able to generate, the more business they can send our way. The loyalty is brought into this. And trust me when I tell you, Ben, this was way before this became a trend.
Right.
So having the opportunity for me to dive in, he said, yeah, worst case, you fall flat in your face and then you do it just like everybody else in the business has done it prior to you. I was like, okay, great. Great success, hit the highs, brought in a ton of business, went into corporate America for, quite some time, worked my way up the ladder. I will tell you, in honesty and nature, it killed me. Yeah. It was one of the most incredible rides, but also one of the most horrible sort of scenarios into that world. And the reason being is because it was high levels of stress and it was just pounding and compounding on in addition to. So from a sales standpoint, that was great. And we were talking about digital marketing. That was awesome. Giving presentations, helping real estate professionals grow and scale their business, having massive success. That's my love. But then, doing what you're supposed to do, which is work your way up into management, going over P&Ls, net gross, and, articulating the message of, okay, paying attention to sales team, and then all the internal politics and drama that is completely out of your control. For me, I'm a no nonsense kind of guy. And not to say that management wasn't for me or, looking at that perspective wasn't, but every single time the revenue increased and my income increased, my responsibility increased, the further it took me away from my passion and the sadder that I was. I just, for me, I'm a very positive and happy guy. So that was a very, very dark place for me to be in. At that time, for me, as I grew into that, I said, I need to really understand why I'm doing what I'm doing. I was just going down the road and I'm checking the boxes because that's what society expects you to do. So I had the hearts of hearts and, very, very meticulous into note and nature years over years saying, hey, I got to do something. So, I ended up having an opportunity constantly getting recruited by companies, all over the country.
It's very competitive. It's a very competitive atmosphere, obviously, the title space.
It's
and
crazy.
dog eat dog.
It's crazy, Ben. And you're right. And everybody wants the A players on the team, and the same principle that applies into the real estate, side for recruiting and for loan officers in particular. I mean, everyone wants the best of the best. And how are we attracting that? How are we really retaining that? So everyone's getting called on simultaneously, and I jumped through a couple opportunities and I've worked with a few title companies, nothing negative to say about the companies or the management or the structure. It was just me. And I always say it's like that breakup line. It's not you, it's me. But the truth is it really was me. I just wasn't in the right space. So setting myself up in articulation, I said, look, I can step into an opportunity and continue down and sign another contract, and kind of sign my life away for the next 3 to 5 years, or is now the right time? A book behind me, Mike Lewis, When to Jump, very, very helpful in that time of my life where, I had to make that decision. Do I continue going down this road where, my health, my relationships, I'm making more money than I've ever seen, but at the end of the day, I'm not happy, so it was a very, very interesting spot to do. So, that book in particular is very pivotal for me. And I'd recommend anybody who's thinking about making a move or a shift or a change in their life or direction. There's so many examples of people from different walks of life and different perspectives that had made decisions that completely pivoted. And there's a different time and a place and what is safe or comfortable for them to make that change, to make that jump. Nothing's set in stone. And, you could procrastinate and say, I need more money. I need more relationships. I'm going to wait till next year because I don't know what the market's doing. There's never a right time. But I think doing your due diligence and really understanding what's going on, for me, starting Lion Bolt Media and, building my own business, best decision of my life, mind you,
right,
minus my wife and, my children, that sort of thing. From a monetary standpoint and from a fulfillment standpoint, taking that leap, massive. It's a massive thing. And I know every entrepreneur who's tuning into this has felt this pain or this, this structure into their life, or is it, what do I do? I'm leaving a corporate job, 6-figure income, all these different things that are, basing this off of, to an uncertainty, to commission only. Being in sales, I've been used to that, but you kind of groom yourself and adjustment to a lifestyle. So it's different, but
can I ask?
Oh yes,
Greg,
please.
Did you instantaneously know in those roles when you were making great money and you were ticking the corporate box of the promotion and doing really well in that atmosphere, did you know instantaneously that you were unhappy with the nature of what that was and it wasn't you? Or was it something that you had to experience and grow through in order to realize that?
That's an excellent question, Ben. And I did not know right away. It took time. It was one of those compounding sort of scenarios. I always base it off of, eating burgers every day, right? So if you eat a burger today, probably not going to change your health overall, right? You're just going to eat a burger. You're going to enjoy it. It's great. Now, if you ate a burger every day for a week, every day for a month, every day for a year, you're going to see some progressive changes, not necessarily in a positive note. So that's what ended up happening with me. It wasn't all at once. It was compounding over time. And I remember, man, this was tough, Ben. So I'm just going to flat out and say it. This was at the worst health of my life. So, big into fitness, big into health. I remember, very specific onto the regimen that I had and, everything that was going on. And for whatever reason, I was trying to just build a body for no purpose at all. I'm not a bodybuilder. I'm not a model or anything like that. It's not a vanity sort of scenario, but it was more to, hey, where can I push my body? How much weight can I move and lift? And for me, in a 5'8" frame, I'm not a big guy. I'm not a tall guy. But for me, I was 170 pounds at my biggest. I got really sick. And a big part of that was stress-induced sickness. And I won't forget it. I was in Breckenridge with my wife, and we were having dinner at Elway's. Great dinner. Went to sleep, woke up, incredible pain in my abdomen kind of area, that sort of thing. And that morning we were going dog sledding. So I thought, what's going on here? Like I got to go dog sledding. This is incredible. Never done this before. Super great. And that spiraled into, really months and months and months of deteriorating from 170 pounds all the way down to 135 pounds.
Right.
And I had no idea what was wrong with me. I went to doctor after doctor. No one could tell me it's this, you're healthy. Da, da. So anyway, finally found the right GI doctors and, got on the right plan. They're like, yeah, I mean, you have some inflammation in your bowels, and at the end of the day, it's massive stress induced into what's going on. And I had no idea. I said, that was kind of the straw, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, and I'm not blaming it on that. I mean, I did it to myself. You're always pushing yourself as an entrepreneur, but I think you're always pushing yourself as an A-type or, if you're trying to reach goals and you have high expectations on yourself, you're going to do what it takes. You're going to sacrifice. And I think that was a point in my life that I said, gosh, and that's what really started the thought process. And to dive into a deeper question into this, which to me really stands out, is starting my own business and leaving corporate America was something that was on my mind for years at that point. So it wasn't a whim. It wasn't a thought like, oh, hey, I think I feel like doing this today.
Yep.
I'm a firm believer that if there's something in the back of your mind that pops in, it's an idea or a shift or a change in a mindset or an opportunity. That's great. It's good to kind of ruminate. If it goes away, it wasn't really meant to be. But if there's something in the back of your mind that just lingers and it doesn't go away, and every year you're thinking to yourself, well, like what now? What do I need more of? Right. And so that would be my encouragement to anybody listening too. I mean, if there's something that you want to do with your life and in this world, and if it's goals into real estate or anything outside of it, take the leap, take the chance. For me, it was the best decision that I've ever made. I've already said that before, but yeah, Ben, this is
so you've rolled into your own media company at this point, and you've started that journey.
Yeah.
I guess that. What was the biggest fear at that point? Because at the end of the day, there's got to be an element where you've got to recognize your fear.
Yeah.
And it's probably one of the reasons that many people within the real estate space that are listening to this at the moment feel that they need to be listening to it. But, I had a conversation with an agent the other day where they said, oh, look, I'm thinking about leaving. I don't know that, I want this different deal and all of this type of stuff. And I'm like, and I said to them, I don't think that the problem is the split. I don't think that the problem is the money. I don't think the problem is any of those different things. I really honestly believe that I think the problem is real estate. I think that you've always, regardless of whether it's raining or it's a drought, from a perspective of financial, there's obviously something there that there is a level of unhappiness because of the roller coaster ride, and the lack of consistency creates this anxiety in your life. And I really do believe that is real estate based. Yeah. And there's so many people that are probably listening to this at the moment thinking, no, I need to listen to this to upskill. I'm going to find that thing that is going to make me better, and it's going to make my business better. It's going to make everything better and more consistent, but then they won't make the change when they find that the root of the problem is actually the industry that they're in, and it could be real estate. So where did that change element, that fear side of things, you said that book was a really big step in all of that, but realistically, what were the biggest fears after you made the decision?
So the biggest fear was even prior to the decision, even though working in the space into real estate for over a decade, understanding digital aspects inside and out, educating at the highest of levels, hiring coaches and trainers and platforms, and speaking on the biggest stages, prior to, and you always have a level of imposter syndrome. It's like you can never know enough. It's always changing. It's always evolving. So I think that was one thing. Would the population that had taken me so seriously for so long take me seriously under my own umbrella? That was a fear of mine.
That's a really good point.
Would the relationships that I forged follow me in that journey? That was something that was very fearful. I've built so many incredible relationships all over the United States at that point. And for me, I was nervous. Hey, it's one of those things that I think people show their true colors when there's no benefit to them into that relationship. And for all intents and purposes, I was helping real estate professionals all over the United States, North America, grow dramatic businesses, right? Yep. And I was showing, I wasn't doing it for them, educating and teaching and training and holding accountable, keeping everything in line. But at the end of the day, I was money to everyone in my life, right? They look at me as like, hey, every time I talk to Greg, I learn something, I apply it, and I make cash. So I want to keep talking to Greg. That's why they answered my calls. That's why they had me in their meetings. So for me to put that into my own perspective where it's not free anymore, they have to put up the money, right? That was something that was interesting for me to go through. The turning point in that initial thought process was going from 170 pounds to 135 pounds in that health issue that I had. Everything's healthy. I'm great. I'm healthy as a horse. That's years and years gone by, but I'll never forget the moment I was in the shower. I was 135 pounds soaking wet, and I had no idea what was going on. This is before I found the doctors that could really figure out what was wrong, which is simplistic in nature. And I just bawled. I was just broke down. I'm not an emotional guy. I've probably cried a few times in my life. My father, I've seen him cry once. He was on, riding a bike. We were bike riding, and we were in England. I won't forget. And we were outside of Culpet Heath inside our town, and he fell over on his elbow on a like cobblestone or kind of brick sort of wall, busted it open. And that's the only time, one tear out of that man's eye. So, he's an engineer. He's very, very dry that way. I love the man. He's the best sense of humor in the world, but you got to know him to know that. But for me, feeling that as to, what's wrong with me, that perspective to me is life is too short. I mean, I didn't know if that was it for me. I mean, I saw doctors for 6+ months and no one could figure anything out. And I'm just like deteriorating. I mean, custom suits, I was swimming in them. I mean, all of my tailored clothes, just horrible. So for me, that was something that I said, look, if I figure this out, I'm going to do where my heart lies. I'm going to go where it's needed. I'm going to impact as many people that I possibly can, because I know that what I do makes a difference. And I know that every single person in my life that has had massive effect, we've done this hand in hand together. And this was something that I always articulate into nature. You can go fast alone, but you can go far together. And that's an old adage that I don't know who originally coined it, but I love that phrase. I think into nature, that's where we should all, be holding perspective. Time waits for no man. It's not to be morbid, but I think that if you have goals and passions in your life, go out there and reach for them. Just make sure that those goals are in nature as you're leaving this place better than when you started. And same thing with relationships. So I knew that everything that was going on with digital marketing into the real estate space, okay, let's go and let's do this. So I remember I was turning off that income. It wasn't a decision based off of corporate. I was literally saying, all right, I'm going to walk away from this.
Yeah.
And it's going to be from that to completely nothing. I just, it's one of those things that's so bizarre. But everything leading up to that, I think there was a fear of money, supporting my family, right? I mean, bills to pay, things that are going on. I mean, structured it in such a way where there was X amount of reserves.
Yep.
I wasn't doing this on a whim. I mean, everything was planned down to the T to my ability. Full support with my wife. And, I had the conversation with her time and time again, and several confidants and mentors in my life. And I said, Greg, look, whatever you do in your life, you hit it to the highest of levels. That's the one thing that isn't going to change no matter where you go, no matter what you do. So I think that you got to bet on yourself. You got to believe in that, and you got to put the work in. Massive amounts of continuous effort and work. Longevity is what's going to yield that result. It's the little things every day that add up. And that's what happened. So when I made that jump, when I made that leap, it was mind blowing, because I said to myself, hey, if I make half of what I made in that job in year one, I'll be so thrilled. Bosh, the best thing. I almost doubled my income in less than 6 months.
Yeah.
So in year one, and that to me was massive. And what was awe-inspiring was all the love and support over all the years and all the people that I helped over a decade prior to opening my own shop. And so it's that athlete mentality. Oh, you're an overnight success. It came easy. And to me, I was standing in the kitchen, and I was with my wife, and I'm just in awe. I'm like, this is crazy. The growth is massive. I had no clue. It's just growing pains. I'm thinking you're like, here I am. And then all this happens. You're thinking, gosh, can I do this? Wow, this is insane. But I was overwhelmed and extremely humbled. And my wife said, look, like, this didn't happen overnight. This took you 10 years to get here. Mm-hmm. This didn't happen 6 months ago. So I think that's the perspective into life that people really need to understand is, and when they look at professionals like you, Ben, they look at any top tier individual, highest levels of their game or making any levels of impact. It is tons of preparation and putting in the hours. It's all the time that people don't see. right? And when you're on stages, you're literally preparing prior to or before you have an event. It's all the preparation just to be smooth, just to say the things that are the right way. The battle is won before it even begins, kind of the art of war sort of mentality. And I don't know. Not to get too deep with you here, Ben. I had no idea what we were going to talk about today, but didn't mean to share those deep life kind of sorrow type story mentalities. But for me, I think it's important to know that you do the right things by people, you work really hard, and you're solving problems that are massive in nature. People will buy into that. They'll get excited about it. They'll understand. But then again, you have to practice what you preach, and in turn, you have to produce above and beyond. You need to under promise, over deliver into that note. I'm a firm believer of that. That's the perspective. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of thoughts that are coming through my head right now. So I'll take a breath. I'll take a pause.
Well, I think that, the inspiration in the sense of that somebody doing something outside of that corporate environment, I think that right now is that if you're a real estate agent in this starved marketplace that we are in at the moment, and you are struggling, and this year is nowhere near what the previous years were, some people would absolutely pray for a corporate job that was a consistent, decent check.
Yeah.
Whereas the people that are in the corporate world are probably begging for the anonymity that we have within real estate.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this unbelievable cycle of having something that we don't have that I constantly see in our industry. But I guess that the thing that sort of comes to mind for me, if we get a little bit more practical in this sense, because I think that the nature and context of where you've come from has certainly been holstered, so to speak, in the way that you've delivered it in such a wholesome way. But that said, there's a couple of practical questions that I think about on that story. Is that what was it that you were doing in the media sense or in that company that was making these agents so successful or building their businesses? Because I think that if you were going to say that you were one of the pioneers in the sense of actually building people's businesses in order to get something in return for that, which was the title business, can you give a structure of the practical elements of what you were doing in their businesses and whether they apply to today's businesses or not? I'm assuming they do. Give us some insight.
Yeah, Ben, great question. And I think that ultimately this is transcendent into any market, and it ends up being the branding aspect and the connectivity, right? The story behind who we're buying into and who we're aligning with. So for me, it's always been about understanding who you are, why you do what you do, and really the unique natures into that note. Now that sounds very broad in scope, but you really need to dissect your life and your desires and your goals and what you're trying to impact in a very specific way. You have to start from that spot and then look at it from a standpoint, okay, so now I know who I am and what my intentions are, short-term, mid-term, long-term. Who do I serve? Who is my target audience or avatar, however you want to break that down?
Yep.
And you really need to get granular into those details. So I always use the adage, I'm a movie nut. I love all types of film. I grew up with my dad watching movies still to today, any chance I get, even though we're in different parts of the country. The aspect of weird science. So it's an 80s film. I don't know if you've seen it at all or any of your audience. So it's a science fiction kind of comedy film, but there's these two characters, Gary and Wyatt. And essentially, they're building a perfect girl with a computer. So they're typing in the perfect girl and everything about it, from brains to physicality and everything along those lines in a computer sense. Well, lightning strikes the house and Lisa comes to life. And that's the whole story of the movie. But why I mention that is that's what we need to be articulating, is building that perfect client. Who is the end user that we're really trying to connect with in a meaningful way? What family or tribe are we trying to build? And I've been preaching that for well over a decade. The clients that really double down on understanding who they are and who they serve, it's massive. It's like trying to have a connected conversation with not knowing who they are or what even language they speak. It's next to impossible to have a connective nature into that. I mean, there's levels of body language and articulation visually, but ultimately to really build that relationship, you need to know who the end user is. And I always use case in point through having a conversation with let's say it's a luxury buyer, and they end up being in the $10 to $20 million category, versus somebody who's a first-time home buyer and an entry level, and let's just use contrasting of $450,000. Typically, that buyer on either ends of it are in two different places in their lives. Typically, they end up being in different demographics. They have different thoughts and problems and evolution into their life. So You can't have the same conversation with both of those people. They're very different people. So knowing who your target audience is, and then knowing where they're going in their journey in their life to buy, to sell, to really provide value and connected nature above and beyond the real estate transaction is paramount. We work with who we get to know, like, and trust, and that's been thrown around forever and a day. So not just basing it and positioning yourself as the local expert and or the go-to for any real estate transaction, buyer, seller in your market, articulated area, geographic, whether it's micro, macro, or on a larger scale. You have to be a human. So many people are fearful of just sharing that story and being open and honest that we have families and that we have other likes and interests that are outside of real estate. And I know that a lot of people have been doing this now as of late, but back then no one was doing it. I mean, talking about, things and passions that they're really evolved to, and then creating content about that, more so capturing the day in the life. So passions that you have, whether you love chess, whether you love gardening, if you're a big foodie, if you're big into your church group or a basketball league, whatever it may be, things that you're passionate about that you're going to evolve and build relationships in the physicality world, you need to capture content and share that emotion and have that one-to-one conversation turn to a one-to-many. So that's always been day one principle, understanding who you are and who you serve, what in addition to real estate you bring to the table that separates you from everybody else, and then finding those individuals that are passionate about those verticals and then connect with them from a digital standpoint, bringing that digital relationship, getting to know, like, and trust each other to the physical world, right? So it's not just for the sake of being known or being visible or being celebritized. It's how do we take all that exposure, all that connectivity and conversation and turn it to a real relationship, which translates into more closed transactions, more referral business, or as of late over the past, 4.5, 5 years, specifically agent attraction, growth into metrics, massive for what we do. So the same principle applies. It's a different avatar. It's a different target audience, but the same thing applies. Who are they? What do they need? What are their pain points, wants and desires? Breaking this thing down, putting yourself in their shoes, and then creating content that articulates a message to connect, to stop them from scrolling, grabbing their attention, but then separating you from everybody else who's saying the same old story, the same old song and dance. You're the rabbit versus the lion. I always use that analogy with your content. So that's a big thing and proponent that we drill in, and we've done it forever and a day. The platforms have changed, the time frames, the algorithms have changed, the media, that sort of standpoint has changed, but the human condition has not. The relationship has not. Using AI and different articulations, like, business isn't going anywhere. The tools have always been there. There's always been a next tool, this, Ben. So it's how do you use that tool or piece of technology to turn you into a better version of yourself, to connect with more people from a one-to-one to a one-to-many, and then ultimately using that to your advantage and not be fearful of that. And the only nature that I have in conversation with people who are more in the scarcity mindset are, look, if you're not adapting, you're going to be dying if you're not already. And the individuals who are going to be adapting and utilizing these pieces of technology or marketing or aspects, they're the ones who are going to be taking the lion's share of market share. So that's how I believe it, not to speak ill of anybody or thought process. Look, if you're comfortable, you're comfortable. But I'm a firm believer of just providing the best product and service at the end of the day to the end user, whatever that may be, and be a genuine person, be the most authentic version of yourself. I think
people struggle with that. People struggle with authentic. There's no question. But it's also, you get to see real estate at such a broad perspective with what you do with Real Estate Titans. And I want to talk about Real Estate Titans here shortly, but I want to ask a more general question. It might be a bad question, but at the end of the day, I think
no such thing, Ben. Come on.
Well, I think it might be a vague question. I've been accused of vague questions before where it's like, well, that's a general. It's like, what's the market going to do? It's like, oh, screw you, man. Don't ask me that stuff. But I'm going to ask you just more of an industry question, because you get to see people from all parts of the industry, servicing the industry, all the way through to actually in it. Is the real estate industry in good shape, or is it in bad shape?
Depends on your particular position in it. The clientele that we partner with and work with, they're doing some incredible things. I think that ultimately you have to look at it from a perspective of, in any market, shape, or form, the ebbs and flows. There is production to be had, money to be made, and or money to be lost, depending on how you decide to go about it. What I have an issue with, or had at least, over the past few years, 2018, 2019, 2020, that sort of scenario, I think it was too easy. I think that a lot of growth and mentality happened for a lot of individuals who were just getting licensed. The threshold to get in is very low. And I feel that muddied the waters for a lot of the true professionals who are putting up the time and the effort, the longevity to really treat this as a full-time business and not just a quick cash grab. I saw a stat the other day that at 2022 or 2023, there were 60,000 realtors that left. So again, I think that ultimately that's answering the question. I think that it's in good shape depending on what you are doing with your business. How you're treating this market is all about that perspective. And not to say that it hasn't shifted. Of course it has. Things change. They always do. You talk to anybody who's been doing this business for longer than 40 years, they've seen a lot. So that, things are different each time. But the same principles applies as putting in the effort. Now, you might have to put in that same effort if you're, in a traditional sense of picking up the phone and door knocking and looking at it from the standpoint of database mining, client appreciation events, pop buys. The amount of effort and work that the average real estate professional was utilizing in a traditional sense over those years was a lot less than is needed right now. You got to double that. You want to make that same level of production. You do have to put additional works into it. But that's where I'm a firm believer of leverage. And I think that leveraging the most important aspect of your brand and your message is crucial and key, because staying top of mind to the people and prospects that are in your world is paramount. Now that it's saying, hey, there isn't as much noise in there because the individual real estate, professionals are kind of seeing themselves out the door. I think now more important than ever, you really got to make sure you're doubling and tripling down on your relationships, your brand and perspective to really say that I am still here. The ones that are still here, that are still doing it, there's a reason for it. So that is a broad question into my perspective. I'm a positive sort of guy, Ben. So yeah, I mean, it's very difficult for you to get anything negative out of me that way. But I will say that there has been, definitely shifting in messaging. Yep. Ultimately looking at it from the standpoint of how are you positioning yourself as a value add to your audience in addition to what was happening prior to. And I think it's coming down to the community and the storytelling of the individual clients and not so much ourselves. They're always the hero. It's not us, it's them. And really just making sure that we're showcasing the right amount of content to be visible. I think it's the weirdest thing when I get calls from real estate professionals and they're like, hey, Greg, I was just talking to somebody so-and-so and I was out at the bar and one of my good friends just bought and sold a house. Well, they didn't use you. It's not their fault. It's your fault, right? You weren't there. You weren't involved in their life, and somebody else obviously was, some way, form, or fashion, whether it's physically or digitally, and in between. So I think another, thought process that I have into this market is taking ultimate responsibility. What you have or what you don't have is because of you. And where you're at in your life is because of the decisions that you made. And it's not just the decisions that we're making today. I mean, everything is 90 days out, look transactionally. So if we're looking at it, the actions that we're taking today are going to have a ripple effect a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. I mean, these little things are just massively compounding. So I think just showing up and having those little wins, little activities that amount up to the big things. I mean, you take your head up and you're like, wow. Now, if you're doing big things in a big way consistently, you're going to see some pretty awesome results. And I'm a firm believer of that on the digital sense too. It's not just the physical world, and they really should be one and the same. I mean, I'm a complete nerd and nut when it comes to that. So, that's definitely something I enjoy talking about, but hopefully that answers your question, Ben.
Well, let's talk about the digital philosophy that you've got within your organization, because Real Estate Titans has become a powerhouse of a podcast in the sense that over 250 episodes, live stream is something that scares the living shit out of me, I'll be honest. Is that again, we were talking about this before, not to discredit any of our guests, but when you bring people on that aren't used to doing podcasts, like you're a dream a guest for me, because I know that you can articulate, what it's like to do a podcast, but sometimes when you ask someone a question, they're like, no. It's like, no, articulate more. Come on. Coming out here.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah. But I guess that give me an understanding of your digital philosophy with your company and what you're doing with the content that you're creating. But then also, what does the future look like for you guys? Because, the sky's the limit, all of those different things. There's so many different angles that your company can go in. Mm-hmm. What does it look like?
I love the question, and I have to thank you for the compliment, Ben. It means a lot. Having the conversations, to me, it's everything. And I'm always a firm believer that if you take the time to have great conversations with people, and not to be into a weird way, but if I were to get hit by a bus later today, I had a great conversation with you, right? This being recorded, somebody somewhere could potentially be impacted by the words and the conversation that we had. And that's a great thing. Having the how's the weather, how's the sports sort of empty conversations. I mean, I try to have these as much as I possibly can. So I thank you for setting this up and sharing it with the world, because it's a labor of love. I know how it is being a host. Going to, everything when we talk about Lion Bolt Media, the philosophy in a nature is really to take it from two standpoints. So the first principle that applies is articulating your brand, your message, and who your audience is, and then what value you bring to the table, and capturing that content, photos, videos, copywriting, right? So the main pillars of the content that needs to be distributed, you have to capture that evoking emotion of connectivity, the same dialogue and conversation that you'd have with a buyer, with a seller, with a potential agent that's coming on board, or a massive team to an organization. What would you say? What emotions would be evoked in that conversation? And how would you make them feel, and vice versa? That needs to be tailored and articulated in video. So short form, mid form, long form. And this is nothing that your audience hasn't heard before, but looking at it from that standpoint of saying, okay, so now that I understand who I am and my audience and their needs, and I'm educating and entertaining them, I need to put it in portions that they're actually going to be able to consume. So I always like the short form being to the gateway to the long form. So there's no sense in looking at it from a standpoint of, okay, I need to create these massive videos and I need to figure out all these ideas. First of all, you don't. Any idea that's in your head has already been done. Very few ideas are new. They're just carbon copies or different articulations. So what I say to everybody is, look to people who are doing this at a high level. We're very fortunate to work with a lot of those individuals. So the strategy behind it is very deep in nature. I have to be very careful what I say in certain instances, but to that point is there are so many people doing this at a high level, yielding revenue because of it, because there's the fake celebrities, right? The fake gurus who they buy likes, they buy views, all these different, they buy followers. It's nonsense. The algorithm is way smarter than we are. But really look to the people who are truly practitioners, who are putting up the numbers. Look to real trends to see what numbers they're actually putting up into their markets, to say, okay, so these people are media and they're putting up massive amounts of transactions. Okay, that's somebody that I can buy into. Look to their sites, whatever you're trying to articulate for your audience, if it's YouTube, if it's TikTok, if it's Instagram, if it ends up being Facebook, there's so many different, we can cover. If it ends up being Google presence, how frequently are they posting? What shapes and forms are they posting, right? What messaging are they leaving? What hooks, what design, what descriptions, tags? Success leaves breadcrumbs, Tony Robbins thing, right? So I think you don't have to figure out what is working. It's already working. So take from the greats and then apply that to your market, to your business, to your style. Create your own version of that, right? And then as you start to build up your flavor, you can start to be a trendsetter instead of just a follower. But that takes progression at a time. So we focus heavy on the brand first, who you are, who you serve, capturing that content with video, short form, mid form, long form, but also looking at it from photo. People sleep on photo. But at the end of the day, advertorial style imagery can evoke a lot of emotions. Coupled with copywriting, ChatGPT and Jasper.io, there's so many different AIs that are now putting copywriters out of business. It's very sad, but it's just the reality of the situation. I think a good copywriter is going to lean into AI and utilize their written word plus artificial intelligence to do so. However, you really should be, as a real estate professional, leaning into those three pillars, taking photos that are not the typical realtor folding arms, winking, smiling kind of shot on a portrait. You want to look at it from a standpoint of with buyers, with sellers, with friends, with family, out in the community, right? Something that you would see in a beautiful billboard or some kind of luxury magazine that would get people to stop and say, what is that? But emotion behind it, not cold or stale, but really understanding your target audience. And the biggest marketing agencies and firms understand how effective this is, how effective visuals are. So taking that coupled with a story with a written word is now that additional pillar. You can have three, which is by itself, which ends up being the text. But I like to have it coupled with video and or with photo. I think that's really the trinity into nature. So we focus on that first and foremost, but that sounds great. How do you put it to work? How do you put it to practice? So that's the big issue that we have, in addition to which we solve. So we go into the note of creating the content. Now we got to distribute the content. So what sites, what timeframes, when's it going to get the most eyes and ears? And we're talking organic. We're not even paid yet, right? Because there's different paid metrics and organic metrics. So you got to understand your audience and then the sites that are needed based off of your main website and or distribution through Google or search engines, and then different individual search engines on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, the like. Once you dial that into nature, you're going to identify the unicorns. The idea is that you put in your mind to say, this is my client avatar, this is my message, this is my brand, and I want to identify the ones that are really engaging. High levels of engagement. I'm not just talking likes, more so comments, and in addition, DMs and or scheduled appointments, articulated based off of an organic post. Organic reach is terrible. I mean, the algorithm's smothering organic reach. So you really got to know what you're doing to make an impact into a short term. Midterm and long term, you got better results, but that's not the immediate gratification that everyone's looking for, right? Everyone wants abs today. It takes time. So I think that looking at it from that standpoint, it's the same thing with building a business, building a brand, and then articulating a message on media. So once you identify those unicorns, which I call, you're going to pour gasoline on that flame, which is ad spend. Ad spend is going to open the doors to the entirety of the audience or articulation you're trying to accomplish that message to. But don't spend money before you know it works. Don't spend money before you dial in your brand. Don't spend money before you saturate a market and know what you're doing. I think there's a fine line there depending on your budgets and your scale. But taking it to that note, I think, is crucially important. So when you do that, you're going to be yielding revenue, results, closed transactions, and or for attraction purposes, that's there. Taking it to the next step, just because you're running ads now doesn't mean that it's going to come in either. So you got to have call to action. So that's where conversion funnels will come into play, any level of conversion. So that's a big proponent. Where are we driving the traffic? Okay, we've grabbed the attention, we've built the audience, we've built the perspective. Now where are we driving them to further our message, to connect? And how are we duplicating touch points? So we drive them through very specifics. You don't want to catch all page. If you're talking to buyers, you need to have messaging speaking directly to those buyers in those markets that you serve. Sellers is the same thing. Drive that traffic you're trying to articulate to a landing page or funnel that's designed to convert the traffic that goes there, and then ultimately to meet you face to face. The goal is to get the appointment. That's where the big conversion happens. Now, that to me is a massive aspect of understanding your audience and then really bringing it full circle. But there's a multitude of drop-off. So you need touch points, fortunes in the follow-up, setting up the proper systems in play for automation, for leverage, so that when you're creating campaigns and you're touching and you're staying top of mind and people are running through your funnels and scheduling appointments, that you're making sure that you're pushing them back to the places that you want them to go. And then ultimately you are staying in a world where you can increase dramatic conversion, because before they even get to you, if it's a phone call, if it's a face-to-face meeting, they've seen all your media, they've seen all your intellectual property, they've seen all your case study and or your testimonials, right? They know your work ethic. You've been consistent with them the entire time through their journey. So when they show up, it's a done deal. You've done all the heavy lifting through automation, through the content that you're posting, organic, the paid ads and campaigns that you're running, the distribution of automation and touch points, 12 to 15 in a minimum basis for conversion. And then you get to that end result. So from start to finish, you got to look at it from setting it up like a true business. So we do a two-punch approach. It's the marketing and the branding association. It's the conversion to close transaction. So nothing has changed in that nature. And even back all those years ago, it was the same thing. There was different tools, there was different metrics, but you got to look at reverse engineering. I'm a big fan of that. What are you trying to accomplish with that piece of marketing or that message? Reverse engineer what the goals and results are, the steps to be in that. And then what's the yielded result? Does that vessel make sense for your audience? Are you going to yield a result in there? Because not every site, not every projection is right for your goals. So many people, they just do a blanket approach and they think, I'm going to do this everywhere and it's going to work everywhere. That's not the case. So in a nutshell, I know that was a long answer to your question as to what's going on. That's really what it is, Ben. I don't hold anything or hide anything. I'm an open book. I think people should be empowered with this information to set up businesses and have massive successes in their lives. It's not that complicated. Some of your listeners might be like, what the heck did Greg just say? All that stuff going on. I mean, some people are like, whoosh, that's fine. And look, if that's the case, there is a nerd on YouTube to explain every single thing that I just mentioned that you can literally do on your own. You do not have to pay a company to do these things. I tell people you either have more time or more money, and we're all in that boat in some form or fashion in our lives. So if right now you have more time than money, learn it. Take the time to learn, break these processes down and understand one at a time and build yield result, bring in revenue, and then reinvest your time into that and money in revenue. If you base it off of then to the next point, all right, so I'm chugging along, I'm going through, I feel good. Now I can bring that to the next, bring it in-house. Don't hire a third party. Look at it from that standpoint is to say, hey, who can I manage and train and who knows me inside and out? It's not some disinterested third party. It's not somebody who is working with an attorney or a CPA or, a financial advisor or a restaurant or coffee shop. You need to work with people who really understand your brand and your market and your structure, the buyer, the seller, the agent specifically, to get inside their hearts and their heads, in their shoes. Otherwise, it's just not going to be effective. It's going to be a one size fits all. It's going to be white noise. So, but if you have more money than time, then you want to align yourself with people who have been there, done that, bought the t-shirt, and yield proven track record results. That to me is everything. It's like hiring a personal trainer who is in bad shape. Look, I'm going to hire, I don't know. I mean, whoever it ends up being, I want what that guy's having. Okay, great. So that's the people that we want to go down that road. And then we look even further to say, okay, well, not only are they in good shape, but look at all of the students that they've helped down that road to also get healthy, in good shape. It's the same thing with business coaches. It's the same thing with anybody to do with marketing or analysis. To me, that's very, very important. This was something, we just shot episode 273 of Titans before I jumped on here. And, that episode was fantastic. And Glenn had mentioned the importance of hiring coaches. And so many people, past Titans, it's been a reoccurring over all the years in so many conversations.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm sure you had this too, Ben. It's like, no one knows it all. We always want to surround ourselves with people who have been down that road, that have had perspective, that can yield things that we don't see, that we don't even pick up into that nature.
Absolutely.
I can't stress that enough. So, just as everybody else, I have so many coaches and trainers of my own. I've been through so many. I've also been a coach and trainer myself. So it's just all these different things kind of have that circle of life, not Lion King sort of standpoint. But I think it is important. But
I think that the thing that you've done here today is you've been able to break down the sophistication of the way that obviously there's so much value add that you can have from a digital space perspective. But the way that you articulated that just previously in order to give people an understanding of the way that it can actually progress in chronological order, I think that's what people miss. But in essence is that there's people like you out there in the industry to continue to help them. There's people like you out there that are going to continue to ask the questions of the people that have been most successful. And I think one of the things that I take out of today, as it's been like drinking out of a fire hose, is that don't try and reinvent something. And I think so many of us actually go out there and try and reinvent something that people have never seen before. And realistically, to be that pioneer, it can be an incredibly lonely space. Like we do it in the auction business because we are quite literally the pioneers of it. And I've got to be honest, the headwinds that we're facing and the people that are trickling in behind us are just dealing with and reaping the benefits of all of the hard work that we're doing in that space. And it's not anyway more rewarding, in that essence is that, to be a trailblazer comes with its problems. And I think that that's where so many people are just trying to reinvent the wheel. But Greg, today has been incredibly insightful. And we want to thank you for being on Rethink Real Estate. I could continue to talk to you forever. And I look forward to a future connection. But thanks so much for joining us today on Rethink Real Estate.
Awesome, Ben. It was an honor, a pleasure. I can't thank you enough, my friend.
Thanks so much. So about 75% of our audience hasn't liked, followed, or subscribed to our podcast. It would mean the world to us, and it would help this podcast more than you know to expand our reach if you were to like, follow, or subscribe on any of the platforms that you're watching or listening on. Thanks again.